What delayed karma finally hit a person who avoided consequences for years? Story 1. I used to work for a mid-sized tech company under a director I'll call Brad. Brad's whole brand was Results Guy. Translation? He took credit for everything and shoved his screw-ups onto whoever couldn't fight back. For years, he'd massage numbers before sending them to upper management. Bonuses were, unfortunately, smaller than forecast. Project budgets were tight. Travel was denied, but somehow Brad always had a new watch, new car, new everything. We all suspected he was skimming our project incentive pool, but nobody could prove it. HR loved him, the VP loved him, and anyone who pushed back mysteriously ended up on a PIP. I'm petty and paranoid, so I started keeping receipts. Every spreadsheet I sent Brad, every approval, every "can you just mark this as non-billable" message, I saved it all, plus the timestamps of what actually got submitted upstream when we caught glimpses in reviews. Fast forward 3 years. Company gets acquired by a huge corporation. Big audit. I didn't trigger anything. I just handed over everything they asked for, exactly as requested. Old invoices, budget docs, email chains where Brad told me to move these bonuses into training expenses so finance doesn't freak. 2 weeks later, we're in a full company town hall with the new CFO on a giant Zoom screen. She's talking about aligning with new compliance standards and says there were material irregularities in one business unit's reporting. They publish the findings to everyone's inbox. It's literally screenshots of Brad's edits versus original submissions, with his name, his login, his tracked changes, and a nice little chart showing the missing funds lining up very neatly with his personal performance bonuses. He was walked out that afternoon in front of everyone. Security at his elbow. No goodbye party, no LinkedIn post. 3 months later, someone linked me his name in a legal filing. The acquiring company is suing him for fraud and restitution. Heard through the grapevine his wife left when she realized the dream house was probably getting clawed back. The man who spent years telling us, in business, perception is reality, got taken down by the one thing he couldn't bully, an audit trail. Story 2. I'm the problem child of my family. My older brother Mark could do no wrong. When our grandma got dementia, guess who suddenly became her favorite and power of attorney? Mark moved her into a smaller place and sold her house to pay for her care. Funny thing, the care home was basic. Meanwhile, Mark shows up to Christmas with a new truck and a boat. When Grandma died, the will he produced left basically everything to him for managing my affairs so faithfully. I got a sentimental ring and some furniture. My parents told me not to rock the boat. What's done is done. It's what Grandma wanted. I let it go publicly. Privately, I was furious. The only thing I did was be the one who visited Grandma every week, even when she barely knew who I was. One day, near the end, she had a rare lucid moment and kept saying, "Check the box," at the bank. The box. I thought she was confused. But after she died, I went to her old bank just to ask. They told me she had closed her safe deposit box years ago. Dead end. Fast forward. 5 years. My aunt passes away, and at the post-funeral family dinner, her lawyer shows up with documents. Apparently, Grandma had made a second will about a year before the dementia diagnosis, and my aunt had kept it sealed because she was terrified of family drama while Grandma was alive. The second will left the estate split evenly, with a very clear clause. If any beneficiary, including my grandson Mark, used their authority to enrich themselves, the other beneficiaries could pursue legal action and full repayment. The lawyer calmly explained that the safe deposit box had held the original of this second will, but Grandma had taken it out and given a copy to my aunt, just in case. Everyone's eyes slowly slid to Mark. He went pale, then red, then started yelling about how you can't just undo everything years later. The lawyer politely disagreed and handed us a folder full of bank transfers from Grandma's accounts to Mark's, along with suspiciously timed cash withdrawals. My parents, who had defended him for years, were suddenly very quiet. My dad finally said, "You told us there was no other will." We ended up suing. Settlement was confidential, but the boat disappeared, the truck was sold, and Mark moved into a tiny rental. The family group chat split in two. Team Protect Mark and Team Respect Grandma. I still wear Grandma's ring. Turns out, I did check the box at the bank. It just took 5 years, a funeral, and a sealed envelope for karma to catch up. Story 3. I'm 19 now, but this started when I was 8. My parents' divorce was ugly. My mom said my dad cheated, my dad said it was complicated, and a judge ended up giving Mom primary custody. From that point on, my life was basically a slow drip of reasons why Dad is trash. Every missed call was proof he didn't really care. Every weekend he couldn't switch last minute for my sports stuff was because his new family is more important. If I ever defended him, Mom would go quiet and sad and say, "It's okay, you'll see one day." She'd leave court documents on the table by accident with lines highlighted, telling me how he tried to pay less for you. Child support. By 14, I basically stopped going to his house. I told the court I didn't feel safe there. That word gets you a lot of traction. Mom cried in the hallway outside the courtroom and hugged me like I'd chosen her. Dad didn't fight it much after that. He just sent texts on birthdays and holidays. A little, "Love you, doors always open." I rarely replied. Then at 17, I needed my birth certificate for college stuff. Mom was at work, so I went digging in her home office. I found a box labeled legal. Inside were the original court filings, including ones I'd never seen. Turns out, Dad hadn't cheated. They'd been separated for months first. He'd overpaid child support for years because he didn't want to fight. Multiple therapists had warned the court about possible parental alienation on my mom's side. There were also printed emails where he begged her not to badmouth him to me, and she basically replied, "Maybe you should have thought about that before you destroyed our family." I felt like someone had kicked a hole in my chest. We didn't have some instant Hollywood reunion. I texted him, we met, it was awkward. I apologized for some of the stuff I'd said in court. He just cried and told me he was glad I was there, that he'd take whatever I could give. Then came my high school graduation. Each valedictorian got to say a short thank you. I wasn't top, but I got a special recognition slot for community service. Mom was in the front row with her boyfriend. Dad was 3 rows back on the aisle. I got up there, looked at both of them and said, "I used to think one of my parents didn't love me because that's what I was told." As I got older, I learned that sometimes the person who talks the loudest isn't the one telling the truth. So this is for the parent who kept showing up quietly, even when I pushed them away. Thank you, Dad. You could feel the air change. Moms in the audience started side-eyeing my mom. My dad just put his face in his hands. My mom went absolutely stone still. After the ceremony, I walked right past her and said, "We're going to dinner with Dad." She sputtered about plans and, "What will people think?" And I said, "Maybe they'll think the same thing I finally did." I moved in with my dad a month later. Mom still tells people he stole me. But for once, the story everyone actually saw wasn't hers. Story 4. My former best friend, Lena, built a whole career as a charity influencer. She'd organize fundraisers for disasters, sick kids, animal shelters, you name it. She'd cry on camera, show DMs from grateful families, post huge screenshots of $50,000 raised. I helped behind the scenes at first. I'd mod her streams, help manage emails, that kind of thing. We were both broke, so I didn't question it when she started taking a small admin fee from donations. She told me it was standard, like overhead for a nonprofit. But the admin fee kept getting bigger. She moved into a luxury high-rise but claimed it was sponsored housing. She'd do 100K charity streams and only post a single blurry receipt from some obscure payment app as proof. When I started asking questions, she accused me of jealousy and told our mutuals I was trying to sabotage her brand. I backed off and quietly drifted out of her circle. 3 years later, a big wildfire hit a nearby region. Lena went into overdrive. "Every cent goes to evacuees. I'll personally deliver the checks." She raised an insane amount in a week. Brands jumped in, matching donations, putting her everywhere. Then someone from one of the payment processors posted anonymously on Twitter. They'd noticed that most of the money from Lena's wildfire fund was going to an LLC with her last name, not to registered charities. They didn't dox her account numbers, just a redacted screenshot of transaction types and dates. People started asking for detailed receipts, actual itemized donations, not just lump sum screenshots. Lena went defensive, then quiet, then posted a Notes app apology about accounting mistakes and miscommunications. Here's the delayed karma part. One of her ex-mods had access to an old shared Google Drive. Hidden in there was a spreadsheet Lena had exported from her payment service years earlier. It listed every campaign, how much was raised, and how much she labeled admin. For some campaigns, it was 5 to 10%. For others, it was 70–80%. A couple were almost 100%. The mod leaked it. People cross-referenced dates with her streams. You could literally see the exact day she bought a car lined up with a Help a Shelter event. Sponsors dropped her in 48 hours. Twitch terminated her partner contract. One of the charities she'd used as a prop publicly confirmed they had only ever received a small fraction of the amounts she'd claimed. I got a DM from her after months of silence. "I know you're loving this. Congrats. You got what you wanted." I stared at it for a long time and then replied, I just wanted you to actually donate the money. She left me on red. Her follower count is still dropping. The wildfires are mostly out now. Her career is too. Story 5. Our neighborhood HOA president, Carl, treated the bylaws like scripture for everyone else. Your grass half an inch too long? Fine. Trash can visible from the street? Fine. Kids' chalk drawings on the sidewalk? Graffiti, plus a warning letter. He loved public shaming. He'd post blurry ring cam shots on the community Facebook group. Who owns this non-compliant trampoline? He once made a widow repaint her house because the beige wasn't the approved shade. Meanwhile, rumors swirled that he was secretly renting his place as an Airbnb, which was explicitly banned in the bylaws. Cars with out-of-state plates would show up, party all weekend, then vanish. Whenever someone asked, he'd say they were cousins visiting. One neighbor, Jess, tried to run against him for president. Right after she announced, she started getting violation notices every other day. Improper mailbox decorations. Holiday lights left up too long. Carl even tried to fine her for having a visible garden hose. She eventually sold and moved. Years go by. Everybody's bitter but resigned. Then a new family moves into the house directly across from Carl. The wife, Tasha, is friendly, works from home, and seems weirdly up to date on HOA law. About 6 months in, we see a post in the Facebook group. Not from Carl, but from Tasha. It's a screenshot of an Airbnb listing. Recognizable kitchen. Same weird rooster clock. The listing had 60+ reviews over 3 years. Caption. Quick question. Isn't this against Section 4.2 of the bylaws? Asking because I just got a warning about my kid's basketball hoop. Comments explode. Carl pops in with, "That's an old listing. Hasn't been active for ages." So Tasha calmly posts a photo taken from her window that morning of strangers dragging suitcases into his house, plus today's date written on a piece of paper taped to the glass. Apparently, Tasha is not just any neighbor. She's a paralegal for a firm that does HOA litigation. She'd quietly been collecting evidence. License plates logged by date, screenshots of guest reviews saying, "Great stay last weekend." Even noise complaints from nearby houses. A group of us hired her firm. They filed suit against the HOA and Carl personally for selective enforcement and violating the bylaws he weaponized against everyone else. In court, his lawyer tried to argue that the rentals were house swaps and family stays. Then Tasha's attorney rolled out a giant printout of the Airbnb calendar, payment records subpoenaed from the site, and Carl's own messages to guests about no parties, strict HOA, don't talk to neighbors. The judge's face when he read that last line was art. Carl lost. Hard. He was removed as president, fined, and ordered to cease all short-term rentals. HOA had to refund some improperly issued fines to residents. Legal fees weren't fully covered, so Carl had to sell his house to pay the judgment. At the final HOA meeting before he moved, he tried to give this bitter speech about ungrateful neighbors. Halfway through, a kid biked by, stopped, and yelled, "Hey Dad, look, now his grass isn't up to code." Everyone laughed. For once, the rules worked on the guy who wrote them. Story 6. Back in my second year of college, I worked part-time in the writing center. One of the English professors, Dr. Hayes, was basically royalty on campus. Tenured, award-winning, always on panels about academic integrity. He also had a habit of mentoring vulnerable students' theses and then mysteriously publishing eerily similar articles a year or two later. Anyone who complained was labeled confused or vindictive. One girl who spoke up about it suddenly found her financial aid reevaluated after he wrote a negative professionalism letter. She dropped out. I helped a senior named Danny workshop her thesis one semester. It was brilliant, a really original intersection of folklore and gender studies. She turned it in. Hayes gave her a B+ with vague comments about lacking sophistication, and she cried in my cubicle for like an hour. 2 years later, Danny messages me a link. Hayes had just won a national award for an article that was word for word her central argument. Same structure, same obscure sources. His name only. I told her to go to the dean. She laughed bitterly and said, "He's the dean's golf buddy." Fast forward about 8 years. I'm no longer at the writing center. I'm working in the university library as part of the digital archives team. We got a grant to digitize old theses and upload them to an open access repository. Part of my job was scanning and OCRing the PDFs, then tagging keywords. Guess whose dusty, forgotten thesis pops up? Danny's. On a whim, I ran a plagiarism check between her thesis and Hayes' award-winning article. The overlap was insane. Whole paragraphs identical, down to her weird little phrases I remembered. Our new provost had come from another university and was on a crusade about research misconduct. So I packaged everything: timestamps, drafts, metadata showing Danny's submission date predating his article by 2 years, and sent it through the official whistleblower portal. Then I went back to scanning like nothing happened. Months later, an email goes out to all faculty. Reminder about citation ethics amid ongoing investigation. Rumors swirl. Then the big one hits. 3 of Hayes' publications formally retracted for significant unattributed overlap with student work. At the next faculty meeting, they announced he'd chosen to retire early. People clapped politely. That night, I got a DM from an unfamiliar handle. "Hey, it's Danny. Someone from the provost's office contacted me. They showed me the report. I saw your name in the file notes. I thought I was crazy all these years. Thank you for proving I wasn't." The article that stole her work disappeared from his CV. Her thesis, with her name on it, became the top download in our repository. The man who built a career stealing other people's words had his entire legacy reduced to a footnote. Retracted for plagiarism. Story 7. My dad was one of those guys who always had a reason for cheating. Mom didn't understand him. Girlfriends were too clingy, etc. He bragged about never getting caught, just managing transitions. He cheated on my mom with his now wife, Mia. He cheated on Mia with at least 2 women I know of. Whenever anyone confronted him, he'd laugh it off. Adults do adult things. Kids don't need to know. Except kids always know. By the time I was 16, I'd accidentally seen enough texts and heard enough whispered arguments to understand the pattern. Every new woman was the one. Every previous one was crazy. I learned not to get attached. When I was 22, Dad and Mia decided to have a real wedding. They'd married at a courthouse years earlier. But apparently Mia wanted the dress, the party, the photos. I was asked to be maid of honor for optics. Their 5-year-old daughter was the flower girl. In the months leading up to it, I learned something unsettling. Mia thought my mom had trapped my dad and neglected him. And that's why he cheated. She sincerely believed that she was different. I kept my mouth shut. Everyone told me not to ruin the day. Wedding day comes. Outdoor venue, fairy lights, open bar. During the reception, they ask me to give a speech. I keep it neutral, talk about blended families, how love is a choice you make every day. Dad pats my arm like I'm his well-trained PR intern. Then it's time for the surprise speech from his best man, his younger brother, who flew in last minute. He taps the mic, looks right at my dad, and says, "So, I wasn't going to say anything, but since we're all here celebrating lifelong commitment," he pulls out his phone, connects it to the DJ's speakers, and plays a voicemail. It's my dad, drunk, from 3 months earlier, bragging about keeping a little apartment downtown for when Mia gets boring. He actually names the woman he's seeing. Someone gasps Mia's name from the crowd. She goes white, then red, then rips off her veil and storms out. Dad chases her. There's shouting in the parking lot. Turns out my uncle had been covering for him for years and finally snapped when he saw Mia posting "True love always wins" nonsense on Facebook. He figured if Dad wasn't going to stop, he at least shouldn't get a fairy tale ceremony on top of it. Mia filed for divorce within weeks. Custody is messy, but here's the karma. For the first time, a judge actually listened to us kids. When asked who we wanted to live with for holidays, all 3 of us, me, my brother, and Mia's little girl, now old enough to understand, said some version of, "Anyone but him, please." He always thought the women were disposable and the kids would stay. He finally got what he gave out, being the one left behind while everyone else walked away. Story 8. I rented from the same landlord, Mr. Chambers, for almost a decade. Old brick triplex in a transitional neighborhood. Rent was cheapish, which he never let us forget. He also refused to fix anything. Leaking roof? Put down a bucket. Broken front door lock? Use the back entrance. When my downstairs neighbor's ceiling literally collapsed from water damage, he tried to blame tenant misuse of showers. He'd show up unannounced, let himself into units with his spare key, and make nasty comments about people's belongings. Anyone who complained got a rent hike at renewal, or a vague threat about finding tenants who appreciate a good deal. Every year, there'd be new rumors. He was buying another building. He was suing the city over code enforcement. He was too connected to ever get in real trouble. Turns out, he was also not paying property taxes. For years. None of us knew until a bright orange notice showed up on the front door. The building was going into tax foreclosure and would be auctioned at the county courthouse in 6 months. Chambers told us it was a clerical error and that he had it handled. He did not have it handled. Meanwhile, my upstairs neighbor, Alondra, had quietly been working with a tenants' rights nonprofit. They documented every code violation, every ignored repair request, every illegal entry. When the auction notice appeared, she called her contact. Long story short, the nonprofit had a program that helped tenants collectively purchase their buildings at auction using grant money and low-interest loans, if they agreed to keep units affordable for a set period. We spent months filling out forms, attending Zoom trainings, sitting in fluorescent-lit conference rooms, learning words like right of first refusal. Chambers kept telling prospective buyers we were troublemakers, but shrugged it off because nobody listens to poor people anyway. Auction day. He shows up in a suit, joking loudly on his phone about picking up my building cheap and flipping it. He sees us, me, Alondra, and two other tenants, sitting with a group from the nonprofit and laughs. You know you can't just buy a building, right? The bidding starts. Opening bid is the tax debt. Chambers tries to bid, but he can't clear his outstanding liens. Our nonprofit rep raises their card under our LLC name. No one outbids. Gavel hits. Sold. The look on his face when he realized he'd just lost his property to the people he'd been exploiting for years? I will die happy remembering it. Afterward, he stomped over and snarled, "You think you can run this place? You don't know the first thing about being a landlord." Alondra smiled and said, "We know more about maintaining it than you ever did." A year later, I signed a lease with our tenant-owned cooperative. Rent is stable, the roof is fixed, and we voted to change the building's official name in the registry. The last piece of karma? Chambers recently applied to rent an apartment in another non-profit-owned building in the area. Guess who sits on their tenant screening committee now? He finally met a landlord who knows exactly what he's like. Story 9. I'm a pharmacist. About 10 years ago, there was a doctor in our town, Dr. Malik, who ran what everyone called the candy clinic. You walked in with back pain, walked out with a 90-day supply of Oxy, no questions asked. I hated filling his scripts. Doses were sky high, combos were dangerous, and the same names kept coming in earlier and earlier for lost meds. If I ever called to verify, he'd sigh dramatically and say, "You pharmacists think you're doctors now." People complained. Families begged the hospital to intervene. But he brought in money. Lots of it. Clinics were packed, and he billed insurance like a pro. The hospital investigated and decided he was just aggressive in pain management. Then the funeral started. Young, old, didn't matter. Overdoses, accidents, a couple of suspicious heart failures. I went to one for a kid I'd watched grow up, and his mom hugged me like it was my fault for not stopping it. I started documenting everything. Dates, quantities, combinations. Every time I wrote counseled patient on risks, I made a copy. I sent anonymous reports to the state board. Nothing. Years pass. The opioid crisis becomes a national headline instead of a whispered local shame. Suddenly, regulators care. They start data mining prescription monitoring programs, looking for outliers. Guess who lit up the chart like a Christmas tree? State investigators came to our pharmacy with a subpoena for records. I handed over a literal banker's box and said, "I've been waiting for you." A year later, there was a medical board hearing. It was public. I went on my day off. The waiting room was full of people I recognized. Patients, parents, a nurse who'd quit his clinic in disgust. Dr. Malik walked in looking tired but still smug, flanked by lawyers. They argued everyone had been in legitimate pain, that he was just compassionate. Then the board projected graphs of his prescribing versus every other doctor in the county. It wasn't even close. They called witnesses. A cop, a grieving father, a woman in recovery who described going to him begging for help to taper off and being handed another prescription instead. Then they called me. I testified about patterns of early refills, dangerously overlapping benzodiazepine prescriptions, and how he'd mocked me for questioning him. I watched his face when I said, "He told me, if I don't prescribe it, they'll just get it on the street." And then he became the street. His license was suspended pending further investigation. Eventually, he took a plea deal. No jail, but permanent surrender of his license and monitoring. Months later, I volunteered at a local rehab to do a talk about meds. One of the counselors introduced himself. "I used to be his patient," he said quietly. "He almost killed me. Now I get to help people he hurt." That was the delayed karma. Not just losing his title, but knowing that every time he drives past the rehab on the edge of town, the people inside are fixing the damage he insisted didn't exist. Story 10. I work in HR for a mid-sized manufacturing plant. A few years ago, we hired a guy named Trent as a shift supervisor. Loud, charming, loved to talk about his combat tours. He wore unit patches on casual Fridays, had a Purple Heart license plate, the whole 9 yards. The company loved him. Finally, a real leader, with discipline. He got fast-tracked for promotions before he'd even learned everyone's names. Actual veterans on the floor were skeptical. His stories didn't add up. Wrong terminology, missions that didn't exist, timelines that overlapped. When one of them gently tried to correct him, he snapped, "Don't question my service." Then he started leveraging it. He'd tell junior employees, "You think this is hard? Try being under fire." Anyone who complained about his temper got labeled soft or disrespectful to veterans. Management ate it up. He also applied for every military-related benefit he could. Tax breaks, hiring credits, even a state-funded veteran leadership program. I processed the paperwork. It all looked legit at a glance. 2 years in, we decided to do a big Veterans Day event. Local news, flags, the whole patriotic package. Our CEO asked Trent to give the keynote about service and sacrifice. A week before the event, I got an email from a woman with a .mil address. Subject line, "Verification of employment for Trent." Last name. She'd noticed his LinkedIn claimed service in a unit she handled alumni outreach for. They couldn't find him in their records and wanted to confirm his dates through us. I dug out his hiring file. The DD-214 form he'd provided looked off. Wrong font, weird spacing. I scanned it and sent it back saying, "This is what we have on file." She replied within an hour, "That's a forgery. We are forwarding this to the appropriate authorities." I took it to our legal department. To their credit, they didn't bury it. They called the State Veterans Affairs Office. Veterans Day comes. Cameras, podium, Trent, in full dress uniform he definitely didn't earn. He's about to go on stage when 2 men in suits walk in with badges. They quietly pull our CEO aside. Instead of introducing Trent, the CEO walks up and says, voice shaking, "Before we begin, we've been made aware of serious questions about the accuracy of one employee's claimed military service. Until that is resolved, they will not be speaking today." Murmurs. Confusion. The actual veterans on staff exchange looks that say, "We knew it." In private, Trent exploded. Called it a witch hunt. Threatened lawsuits. HR, me, calmly slid a termination letter across the table, citing falsified documents and benefit fraud. The final punch didn't land until months later. One of our real vets came by my office with a flyer. It was for a new local nonprofit offering job training for veterans. At the bottom, under program coordinators, was the name of the woman who'd emailed me from the .mil address. "She asked me to give you this," he said. "Said to tell you that every time they help a real vet get the benefits they deserve, they think of the ones people like Trent stole." Trent lost his job, his fake status symbols, and is reportedly under investigation for fraud. The guy who built his whole personality on a war he never fought ended up exposed by the very community he tried to impersonate. And the people he once dismissed as weak are the ones rebuilding what he helped break. Story 11. I'm 27 now, but for most of my life I thought my mom's long-term boyfriend, Ray, was just commitment phobic. They'd been together since I was 8. He practically lived at our place but always kept his own apartment in another town for work. Mom wanted to get married. He always had a speech ready about paper doesn't define love, and I saw what divorce did to my parents. He was charming, brought gifts, remembered birthdays. He was also mysteriously unavailable every Christmas Day after 3 p.m. When I was 24, I did one of those cheap DNA test kits with a friend for fun. A few weeks later, I got a match. Close family, 23% shared DNA, possible half-sibling. Her name was Sophia. Same region, same age as me. We messaged, assuming some great-uncle secret baby situation. After a few awkward, what exchanges, we started connecting timelines and photos. She sent me a picture of her dad. It was Ray. Older, more gray, but undeniably him. Turns out he was married to Sophia's mom for 30 years. He'd told them he traveled constantly for work. Told us the same thing. We compared calendars and realized he'd literally split his week down the middle for decades. Sophia and I were furious for different reasons. She felt her whole family was fake. I felt like the side quest he never committed to. We didn't confront him right away. We stayed in touch, trading stories, screenshots, and rage. Then, last year, I got a call from an unknown number. "Is this Elise? I found your number in his phone. This is St. Mary's Hospital. We have a patient named Raymond, last name. Listed you as an emergency contact. He'd had a heart attack at work. When I got there was already a woman in the chair by his bed, holding his hand. Sophia was standing in the corner, arms crossed. The woman looked up at me and said, 'Who are you?' 'I'm his girlfriend's daughter,' I said. Silence. Then she said very quietly, 'I'm his wife.' The nurse came in with forms. We need a legal next of kin to consent for the procedure. Everyone looked at me like I might jump in. Instead, I stepped back. It's her, I said. She's his wife. It hit him then. He couldn't talk much with the mask on, but his eyes went wide, darting between us like he was calculating which life to save. His wife signed. Then she put the pen down and said, without looking at him, "When this is over, my lawyer will call you." Mom never visited. She told me, if he lives, he can explain. If he dies, I don't need an apology. He survived. He lost both households. Sophia and I kept talking. The delayed karma wasn't the heart attack. It was lying in that bed, literally powerless, while the women he'd kept compartmentalized calmly rearranged their lives without him at the center. He spent years refusing to make anything official so he wouldn't lose control. In the end, the paper he dodged was the divorce paperwork that finally set everyone else free. Story 12. I'm the IT guy for a small school district. I'm the dude who resets passwords, fixes projectors, and maintains the student information system. Glamorous stuff. Our high school principal, Mrs. Carter, was a local legend in the worst way. Alumni remembered her as the queen bee bully in the 90s. Now she ran the school with a zero-tolerance policy, unless you were part of her inner circle. Kids got suspended for vaping once in the bathroom. Meanwhile, her daughter and her friends could skip class, scream at teachers, and get counseling referrals instead of detentions. Teachers complained, but Carter had the superintendent's ear and a reputation for raising standards. Part of my job was managing permissions in the discipline system. I noticed something weird. Sometimes incidents would vanish. A fight reported at 9 a.m. would be gone by 3 p.m., like it never happened. Every deletion left a small footprint in the back-end logs. User, timestamp, record ID. Most admins never see it. I do. Over 2 years, I saw a pattern. Almost every deleted incident involved the same handful of students, including Carter's daughter. And the user deleting them? Carter. I flagged it to my boss. He told me, "Let it go. You don't want to pick this fight." Then one of the kids not in her circle, a quiet sophomore named Miles, got into it with her daughter. Classic bullying. She'd been posting edited videos of him online. He finally snapped and shoved her. He got a 10-day suspension and a recommendation for alternative school. I watched Carter enter the fight into the system and delete the daughter's role from the report entirely. On paper, it was an unprovoked assault. That night, I went home and pulled a full export of the discipline system logs. Every deletion, every edit. I saved it on an external drive. A year later, the district decided to switch to a new student system. We hired a consultant to migrate the data. They copied everything, including the back-end logs, into a more user-friendly audit viewer. The superintendent, playing with his new toy, noticed an odd spike in deletions tied to one user account. Mine? No, Carter's. He asked for a report. I reluctantly provided the one I'd prepared a year earlier, plus a simple chart. Deleted incidents versus student last names. At the next school board meeting, they added a closed session about personnel and student discipline. I had to be there as the tech guy to explain the logs. Parents were invited in when it became clear this wasn't a glitch. One of the parents recognized Carter from their own high school days. She stood up and said, voice shaking, "You bullied me when I was 15. Now you've been erasing what your daughter does to other kids. How many generations have to go through this?" Carter tried to claim it was data cleaning and misunderstandings. Then the board president pulled out printed copies of incidents before and after her edits, with her login stamped on every change. They voted to place her on administrative leave that night. She resigned a month later with a bland statement about spending more time with family. Weeks after she left, Miles came to the tech office to return a Chromebook. On his way out, he stopped and said, "My mom said you're the reason they believed us." I told him I just moved data around. He shook his head. "No, Mrs. Carter always said if it's not in the system, it didn't happen. Now it's in the system." She spent years teaching everyone that records were power, and only she controlled them. In the end, the thing she couldn't bully was the audit trail she didn't know existed. Story 13. I used to work at a tiny startup run by a guy named Joel. Think TED Talk charisma. Motivational quotes on the wall. "We're a family," speeches as he paid us in stock options instead of actual salaries. He liked to say, "Ideas are cheap. Execution is everything. Then take credit for all of our execution." He'd pitch investors using prototypes we'd built on our own laptops over weekends, then tell us, "We'll all be millionaires when we exit." Our contracts were vague. He'd emailed us offer letters, promising equity and standard IP assignment, but never followed up with actual paperwork. When one dev asked about it, Joel snapped, Of course your code belongs to the company. Don't get greedy. I was the one who built the core engine, the algorithm that actually made our product work. I wrote it at home before I officially started, using my own hardware, pushed to our repo once I joined. I kept local copies. I also had the original dated notebook where I'd sketched it out. Paychecks were late more often than not. Joel bought a Tesla for meetings. When two engineers quit over the money, he badmouthed them to investors, saying they couldn't handle startup life. Eventually, I bailed too. No drama. I just said I needed stability and left. Joel sent a snarky email about some people not being cut out for greatness. 3 years later, I get a LinkedIn message from someone at a big corporation I'll call Megacorp. They're in late-stage talks to acquire Joel's company. As part of due diligence, they want to confirm the provenance of the core engine. Did you write this code while employed there? They ask. I reply with the truth. I wrote the initial version before I was hired, never signed an IP assignment, was never fully paid what was promised, and have time-stamped files and notebooks to back it up. I send nothing proprietary, just the summary and dates. A few weeks pass. Then I hear from an ex-coworker. The acquisition is on hold. Investors are panicking. Megacorp's lawyers found enough ambiguity in IP ownership to consider the whole thing toxic. Apparently, when they confronted Joel, he tried to bluff, saying I'd orally agreed to transfer everything. Their lawyers asked for signed agreements. There were none. Investors turned on him fast. Without the acquisition, the company couldn't repay its loans. Lawsuits started flying. Breach of fiduciary duty, misrepresentation, you name it. Then I got a certified letter from Megacorp's legal department. They weren't suing me. They wanted permission to license a new version of the engine directly from me. Not the old code Joel still had, but the idea and approach, rebuilt clean. I said yes, with an actual contract, actual money, and an actual lawyer on my side. Months later, out of curiosity, I read one of the court filings in Joel's case. A judge wrote that his pattern of promising equity and ownership he did not have the authority to convey was particularly egregious. The guy who spent years telling us, "You're nothing without my vision," ended up watching the only part of the company that worked walk away with the people he underpaid and dismissed. His exit happened, just not with him. Story 14. My wife and I bought a small house in what we thought was a quiet neighborhood. The first week, our next-door neighbor, Greg, came over with his off-leash German Shepherd, Diesel, trotting ahead of him. "Don't worry, he's just friendly," Greg said, as Diesel stuck his nose straight into my wife's stomach. She was 6 months pregnant at the time. Over the next few years, Diesel was always loose. He'd charge the fence snarling when we were in the yard. He'd chase kids on bikes. Twice he cornered our mail carrier on the porch. Every time we brought it up, Greg rolled his eyes. "Maybe don't teach your kids to be scared of dogs," he said once, after Diesel knocked my toddler over. We called animal control multiple times. They'd show up, give him a warning, then somehow the complaint would disappear. Turned out Greg's cousin worked for the city. So we did what everyone does now. We bought cameras. One pointed at our driveway, one at the front porch. They caught Diesel's greatest hits, lunging at strollers, ripping up our landscaping, Greg laughing in the background. We time-stamped and saved everything. Years go by. We're the overreacting neighbors. Our kids learn to sprint from the car to the front door. I carry pepper spray to take out the trash. Then, last summer, a grocery delivery driver shows up. As he's walking back to his car, Diesel barrels out of Greg's yard and bites him on the thigh, hard enough to draw blood. The driver manages to shove him off and limp to his car. This time, the driver calls the police himself. Animal control comes out again. Greg tries the usual routine. He must have startled him. Diesel's never done this before. The officer knocks on our door and asks if we've ever had issues with the dog. My wife and I look at each other and just start laughing. Not because it's funny, but because it's surreal. "We have tape," I say. In municipal court a month later, Greg shows up with a printout of an online certificate declaring Diesel an emotional support service animal. He looks smug. "He can't be declared dangerous," he tells the judge. "He's a service dog." The judge asks if anyone has evidence. Our lawyer wheels in a little cart with a laptop and a projector. For the next 15 minutes, the courtroom watches clip after clip. Diesel lunging, charging, knocking over trash cans, Greg egging him on. "Get him, boy." At one point, Diesel is barking at a group of kids while Greg shouts, "Yeah, you better run." The judge pauses the video, looks at Greg and says, "Is this your idea of service?" Result? Diesel is declared dangerous, removed from Greg's custody, mandatory quarantine and evaluation. Greg is fined heavily and put on probation for animal cruelty and public safety violations. The bogus service animal certificate becomes part of the public record, an example in estate training on fraudulent documentation. A few weeks later, our eldest son came home from school with a flyer. The city was starting a Safe Pets, Safe Streets education program. On the bottom, in small print, funded in part by fines collected from dangerous dog violations. Does this mean Diesel helped pay for this? He asked. Kind of, I said. Greg spent years telling everyone else to calm down, he's friendly, while weaponizing his dog against the whole block. In the end, every careless moment he shrugged off became the evidence that took the dog away and paid to teach other people not to be like him. Story 15. I moderate a niche hobby for him. Miniature painting, of all things. You'd think tiny plastic knights wouldn't attract drama, but the internet is creative. We had one user, Shadow King, who was a constant problem for years. He never technically broke the big rules. Instead, he'd skate right up to the line. Sarcastic comments, targeted jokes, dog-whistling insults at women and queer members. If anyone pushed back, he'd rally his little crew to mock them off the site. When we'd warn him, he'd hide behind free speech and accuse us of witch hunts. He used VPNs, multiple sock accounts, all the tricks. We'd ban one, another would pop up. A couple of women left the hobby because of him. One of them got doxxed. Her full name and workplace showed up on a different site with a thread calling her toxic. We couldn't prove it was him, but the style matched. I wanted to nuke him from orbit, but the site owner was terrified of legal issues. Unless we're 100% sure, just keep banning and moving on, he said. So I started keeping my own little dossier. Screenshots, IP logs, what I was allowed to see, patterns of language, not to dox him, just to be ready if he slipped. He slipped. One day, Shadow King posted a long rant mocking a trans teenager's paint job. In the corner of one of his work-in-progress photos, I noticed something. A glossy badge on a lanyard, reflected in a monitor. You could zoom in just enough to make out a logo, and the first name M. We reverse image searched the company logo. It belonged to a mid-sized insurance firm in the same city his IP usually resolved to. Rather than blast it publicly, I quietly compiled everything. His accounts, the harassment, the probable link to the doxing thread, and that photo. I wrote the driest, most factual report of my life and sent it to the company's anonymous ethics hotline, which was listed on their website. Months passed. Shadow King went quiet. A couple of his old buddies said he was taking a break from toxic communities. We rolled our eyes and enjoyed the peace. Then, about 6 months later, a new user popped up. Friendly, enthusiastic, clearly new to the hobby. After a few weeks, she posted an off-topic. I just want to say thank you to the mods here. I used to lurk under a different account years ago, but I left after someone here harassed me and my friends. Recently, I found out my ex-husband lost his job because of online behavior. I'm 99% sure it was about what he did here. Losing that job finally forced him into therapy and gave me the courage and legal leverage to leave. I'm painting again now, so thanks for banning him. It changed more than you know. She didn't name him. She didn't have to. I stared at her post for a long time. I hadn't reported him to get anyone fired or to blow up a marriage. I just wanted the harassment to stop and for someone with power over him to actually care. He spent years hiding behind anonymity, convinced there'd never be consequences because the internet isn't real life. The delayed karma wasn't just HR calling him into a room with a folder of screenshots. It was that, for once, the fallout of his behavior landed on him instead of the people he targeted. And one of those people used that moment to walk away and start over. The plastic knights are still petty sometimes, but the worst dragon got slain off screen. In an HR office he never expected would be part of the game. Story 16. I met Nico through a running club. He was magnetic in that way. People who talk fast and smile a lot tend to be. Always between big deals, always launching something huge, always one step away from his first million. Over the years, he borrowed money from half our circle. Nothing dramatic at first. Can you float me $300 till Friday? Then bigger. A few of us pushed back, and he'd pay just enough to keep his halo. He'd show up to races in new shoes, post stories from rooftop bars, and meanwhile, he was late on rent. His trick was emotional collateral. He'd say his mom was sick. His startup was getting sabotaged. He was about to close a round and just needed bridge cash. If someone said no, he'd get wounded and imply you weren't a real friend. I never lent him a dime. My dad grew up around gamblers, so my radar twitches when someone is too smooth. But I watched friends get drained dry for 8 years. Some were embarrassed and quiet. Some got angry and got paid back in crumbs. Nico always slid away from the consequences like soap in a bath. Then his mom actually died. It was sudden, heart thing. We were all stunned. Nico was wrecked in a way that looked real. He asked the club to come to the funeral, and we did. At the wake, he clung to people like a lifeline, thanking everyone for being family to her. 2 weeks later, a couple of friends got group texted by Nico. Mom left me a little insurance payout. I'm finally in a place to repay you. Come by Friday and I'll square up. Everyone was shocked and honestly relieved. But Friday came and went, and suddenly he was waiting on paperwork. Then the bank froze the transfer. Then just silence. Again. Here's where delayed karma has a way of showing up holding paperwork. Nico's mom had a sister nobody knew about. She lived out of state and didn't do drama. When she arrived to settle the estate, she went to probate court with the will. In it, Nico was supposed to receive the insurance money only if there were no outstanding debts, including personal loans made under false pretenses. She'd found a binder in her sister's apartment labeled Nico's borrowing. It was a neat little log of every emergency, every amount, every person, dates, names, even a note that said, "He promises he's paying for rent, but I suspect it's for lifestyle." She brought that binder to the judge. The court subpoenaed our club members. People showed up with texts, screenshots, Venmo receipts. Nico tried to argue it was gifts and friends helping friends. The judge didn't buy it. The ruling said the insurance payout had to go first to repay the documented loans. Nico lost the money he'd been dangling like bait for years and gained a court order against him that made future borrowing legally risky. After the hearing, his aunt walked up to us in the hallway and said, "I'm sorry it took her dying for this to get fixed. She wanted you all paid back while she was alive." Nico never came back to the club. The last I heard, he'd posted a furious rant about snakes and people celebrating his grief. But the truth was simpler. The one person who still loved him enough to keep receipts loved the rest of us enough to make sure her goodbye included justice.